How Victorians tried to keep cool in summer heat. The air is thick. London, 1858. The sun presses down like an iron weight, and the cobblestones radiate the day's heat back into the crowded streets. The Thames lies low and sluggish, its water dark, slow, and foul, carrying the stench of refuse and sewage that hangs heavy in the summer air. Flies swarm in clouds, buzzing around horse dung, rotting vegetables, and fish stalls in the markets. Coal smoke lingers too, mingling with sweat, sour beer, and the bitter tang of lime sprinkled on streets in a futile attempt to mask the smell. This is the brutal reality of a Victorian summer. Strange, enduring, and often forgotten. There are no fans humming, no refrigerators waiting in kitchens, no relief from an air conditioner. People wrapped in woolen corsets must find ways to endure. The forgotten daily traditions of surviving the heat were not glamorous, but they were necessary. If you're enjoying this journey into forgotten lives, don't forget to subscribe for more untold histories, the small, strange details of daily life that textbooks often leave behind. Inside the homes of the wealthy, the fight against heat began with darkness. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn to block the sun, turning parlors into caves of shadow. Servants opened windows only at night, when faint breezes drifted through gardens heavy with damp earth. Bowls of water were placed on sills so that evaporation might cool the air. Towels soaked in cold well water were pressed against the temples and wrists of pale ladies reclining in armchairs. But step into the poorer districts, and the contrast is brutal. Brick terraces in the East End, overcrowded Glasgow tenements, Manchester's narrow streets. They trapped heat like ovens. Families opened their windows, only to welcome air thick with soot and stink. Sometimes a cracked basin of water on a windowsill was all that stood between a suffocating room and a breath of relief. Children crowded near fountains in public squares, dipping hands and faces into cold spray. Yet the question lingers. What about those who had no access to fountains or parks at all? The heat itself was dangerous. Stagnant water turned lethal in warm months. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery spread faster when rivers and wells grew foul under the summer sun. In 1858 came the Great Stink, when the Thames reeked so powerfully that sheets soaked in chloride of lime were hung across Parliament's windows. Politicians fled chambers choked with odor, and only then did they fund Joseph Bazalgette's Great Sewer Project. In a strange way, brutal summers forced progress, reform born out of unbearable heat. Yet clothing made the season worse. The daily life of a Victorian man meant heavy wool suits, collars starched until stiff, even in July. Women were bound in corsets, weighed down with petticoats and layered skirts. The parasol shaded skin from the sun, but beneath its canopy, heat suffocated. To remove layers was unthinkable. Modesty mattered more than comfort. Some who could afford it chose linen or light muslin, but the working poor wore what they had, garments worn thin but still heavy. How did laborers endure 12-hour shifts in mills or fields, bound in such cloth? In the countryside, the rhythm of life adjusted. Farmers rose before dawn, working fields while the air was still cool. By midday, tools were set aside, animals sought shade, and families gathered in cottages with thatched roofs and whitewashed walls, which reflected light better than city brick. Children played in streams, dipping their feet in running water. Alehouses with stone cellars became retreats, cool and damp, where men lingered over mugs of beer that were often safer to drink than well water. In cities, another strange tradition appeared: ice. Imported at vast expense from Norway and New England, blocks were stored in underground ice houses, wrapped in sawdust and straw. By mid-century, some of this ice reached the streets. Vendors sold penny ices, shaved ice mixed with syrup. Imagine the delight of a child tasting such fleeting coolness. But this was a rarity. For most, ice was unattainable, which raises the question, how did the majority survive the same heat with no luxury at all? Escape became the answer. The new railways carried clerks, seamstresses, and factory families away from smoky cities to the seaside. Brighton, Blackpool, Margate, their beaches filled with bodies seeking the cool of the sea breeze. Bathing machines, wooden huts on wheels, allowed women to enter the surf unseen. The seaside was not just leisure, it was survival. A day away from the smoke and stench meant a chance to breathe, to cool, to endure. Closer to home, public gardens and parks became sanctuaries. London's Victoria Park, opened in 1845, gave the working poor shaded walks and wide grass. Kew Gardens offered exotic plants beneath towering trees, though its great glass houses became ovens by noon. Even the Crystal Palace, marvel of iron and glass, shimmered like a greenhouse in summer, magnificent but suffocating. What must it have felt like to step inside, dazzled by progress, only to wilt in its heat? At night, the battle continued. Bedrooms held the day's warmth, brick walls radiating heat into the small hours. Families flung windows wide, but with air came noise, mosquitoes, and flies feeding on the summer's filth. In courtyards, some dragged mattresses into the open. On rooftops, under stars veiled with soot, people slept for relief. The wealthy escaped to summer estates in the countryside, to Scotland's cool lochs or the breezes of the Lake District. The poor endured, trapped in tenements where sleep was restless and stifling. Still, invention stirred. Fans, once delicate tools of aristocratic women, became cheap enough for more households. Small ventilators were fitted into windows, promising circulation. In America, the icebox entered kitchens, though in Britain it remained rare until later decades. These were humble beginnings of the cooling systems we know today, seeds planted by desperate summers. Heat shaped culture, too. Dickens wrote of the very stones seeming to bake. Painters captured parasols, hazy afternoons, and children at the seaside. Poets described languor and stillness. But for most Victorians, culture was less about art than survival. They shared bowls of cool milk. They bought ginger beer from vendors crying out in the streets. They savored lemon ice and paper cones standing in the shade. These forgotten daily traditions carried them through long, brutal months. Imagine it now. Twilight settling, the city slowly quieting. Curtains stir with faint breezes, though the air still clings heavy. Somewhere, a piano drifts through an open window. On rooftops, children turn on thin sheets, dreaming of water and waves. The smell of soot and river mud lingers, yet the air eases, just a little. The season continues day after day, shaping habits, reforms, and escapes. Forgotten today, but once central to survival. And so a question lingers in the night. Would we endure as they once did? Without comfort, bound in wool, smoke, and silence?